No one walked into that stadium thinking they were about to witness a turning point. It was billed as a marquee matchup, yes. Prime time, national broadcast, sold-out stands. But on paper, it was simple. One game, two quarterbacks, a score to settle later. Except everyone inside knew the truth. This was not just a game. This was a comparison. On one sideline stood Dan Marino, the arm the league couldn't stop talking about. Young, fearless, built for the future. The man who threw passes so fast receivers barely had time to react. The quarterback who didn't just beat defenses, he overwhelmed them. Analysts called him inevitable. Commentators called him the next era. Some even whispered something louder, something more dangerous. Better than Montana. Across the field stood Joe Montana. No headlines followed him onto the turf. No dramatic music. No exaggerated confidence. Just calm. He jogged lightly, helmet tucked under his arm, eyes scanning the field the way a chess player scans a board he's already memorized. Montana had heard the whispers. He always did. Every great quarterback eventually hears them. You're still good, but you're not the future anymore. He never argued. He let time do that for him. The crowd roared as Marino took his first warm-up throws. The ball exploded from his hand. Tight spirals, perfect velocity. Each throw felt like a warning shot. This was his moment. Montana watched from a distance, expression unreadable. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't impressed. He was measuring. Because Montana understood something Marino didn't yet. Football wasn't about arms. It was about moments. And moments had weight. The game started fast, too fast. Marino wasted no time establishing dominance. Quick reads, sharp routes, no hesitation. The defense barely settled before the ball was already gone. Touchdown. The stadium erupted. Cameras cut to Montana. No reaction, no frustration, no urgency. Just a slow breath. Because Montana had been here before. Young stars always started hot. That was how belief worked. Belief burned fast. Montana stepped onto the field for his first drive. The contrast was immediate. No deep bombs. No risky throws. Short completions. Precise timing. Every pass felt intentional, like a sentence spoken slowly so no one could misunderstand it. The defense tightened. Didn't matter. First down. Another. Montana didn't attack the defense. He controlled it. Touchdown. Now the noise changed. It wasn't excitement anymore. It was attention. The first quarter passed like a warning shot from both sides. Marino scored with brilliance. Montana answered with composure. By the second quarter, the question had shifted. It was no longer who is better. It became something sharper. Who decides when this game ends? Marino kept throwing and throwing and throwing. The arm never failed him, but something else began to surface. Something subtle. Impatience. He wanted separation. He wanted a statement. Montana wanted none of that. He wanted time. Each Montana drive shortened the game. Each completion drained seconds from the clock and confidence from the other sideline. Halftime arrived with the score close. Too close. In the locker room, Marino paced. This was supposed to be his takeover. The night everyone stopped comparing him to Montana and started replacing him. Across the hall, Montana sat quietly, helmet off, eyes down. He wasn't giving a speech. He didn't need to. Everyone in that room understood something instinctively. Montana wasn't playing to win a game. He was playing to own an ending. As the teams returned to the field, the tension felt heavier. Because games like this don't turn on touchdowns. They turn on seconds. And somewhere ahead, waiting, unseen, were 45 seconds that would decide how this night would be remembered forever. By the third quarter, the scoreboard still looked reasonable. The kind of score analysts could debate. The kind of score that suggested balance. But balance was an illusion. Because the game had stopped being about yards. It was about control. Marino came out aggressive after halftime. He had to. His throws were sharper now. Tighter windows. Faster releases. He wasn't just reading the defense anymore. He was challenging it. And it worked. Another touchdown. The crowd surged back to life. This was the version of Marino they believed in. The one who didn't wait. The one who took. But something subtle followed that drive. Something only quarterbacks noticed. The defense didn't look defeated. They looked tired. Not physically. Mentally. Because every time Marino scored, Montana answered with something worse than points. He answered with time. Montana's next possession lasted nearly 8 minutes. 8 minutes of precision. 8 minutes of discipline. No wasted plays. No panic throws. Just movement. 5 yards. 7 yards. First down. Again. The defense backed up, not because they were beaten, but because they were being managed. When Montana finally reached the red zone, there was no rush. He waited, then delivered. Touchdown. Now the score was tight again, but Marino was no longer smiling. He glanced at the clock more often now, checked the sideline, adjusted his helmet. He was still in control, but he could feel something slipping. The fourth quarter began with tension thick enough to feel. Every snap carried weight. Every second mattered. Marino's drives grew shorter, not because he played poorly, but because Montana refused to let the game open up. The field shrank. Mistakes mattered more. A dropped pass here, a hurried decision there. Nothing catastrophic, just enough. With 5 minutes left, the score was nearly even, too even. This was the danger zone, the place where quarterbacks stopped playing football and started playing clocks. Montana thrived here. He had lived here. Marino was visiting. The defense forced a stop. Montana took the field again. This drive wasn't flashy. It wasn't designed to excite. It was designed to suffocate. Short routes, safe throws, clock running, third down conversions that felt like punches to the ribs. Every first down drained belief from the other sideline. By the time Montana reached midfield, the stadium was no longer loud. It was tense, because everyone understood what was happening. Montana wasn't chasing points. He was setting the table. The drive stalled just outside scoring range. A punt, not a failure. A message. Marino took over with under 3 minutes remaining. This was supposed to be his moment. The arm, the urgency, the future. He moved the ball quickly, too quickly. Passes flew. The chains moved, but the clock didn't slow. 2 minutes, then 90 seconds. Marino glanced up again. Now the pressure was visible. He wasn't afraid of the defense. He was afraid of time. A miscommunication. A near interception. The drive stalled. Punt. And now, everything changed. Montana stepped back onto the field, with just over a minute left. The score close enough to matter. The crowd silent enough to hear breath. This was not about heroics. This was about ownership. Montana didn't rush. He didn't hurry the snap. He looked calm, almost detached, as if he already knew the ending. The first play gained 6 yards. The clock kept moving. Second play, another short completion. First down. The sideline remained seated. No cheers, because cheering would imply hope, and hope was leaving the building. Montana looked to the sideline, not for instructions, for confirmation. He got it. The defense stacked the box now. Desperate. Montana didn't flinch. He checked the play. Audible. Snap. Pocket collapsing. He stepped forward. Released. Perfect. Another first down. And now the clock showed something dangerous. Under 1 minute. The realization hit the stadium all at once. There would not be enough time. Marino stood near the sideline, helmet on, watching. He wasn't angry. He was stunned, because he finally understood. This was never about who could throw harder. This was about who could decide when the game ended. Montana knelt. Once. The clock kept running. Again. And now there it was. The moment no one saw coming at kickoff. 45 seconds left on the clock. Not enough time to fight back. Not enough time to argue. Just enough time to understand what had happened. The game wasn't won with a throw. It was won with patience. And as Montana walked off the field, the stadium stayed quiet. Not in disappointment, in recognition, because everyone there knew they had just watched a master take time itself and bend it to his will. The scoreboard showed the final result, but the scoreboard wasn't what people remembered. They remembered the clock, because with 45 seconds left, the game had already ended. Not officially, not mathematically, but mentally. The crowd stayed seated. No chance, no late-game desperation, just understanding. On the sideline, Dan Marino stood with his helmet on, eyes fixed on the field. He wasn't angry. He wasn't arguing. He was watching something unfamiliar. Control without aggression. Victory without spectacle. Across the field, Joe Montana knelt once more. The clock moved. That was it. No final pass. No dramatic scramble. No last-second miracle. Just time disappearing. When the whistle blew, the stadium exhaled. Not in disappointment. In acceptance. Players shook hands. Coaches nodded. But something else lingered. Something quieter than celebration. A realization. Marino walked off the field slowly. His numbers were impressive. His throws were flawless. His arm had done everything expected of it. And yet the game had slipped away from him, without a single catastrophic mistake. That was the unsettling part. In the locker room, reporters asked predictable questions. Was the defense tired? Did the play calling change? Was there anything you would do differently? Marino answered professionally. But one question lingered unasked. When did you know you weren't getting the ball back? He knew. Everyone did. When Montana took the field with calm in his eyes and seconds in his favor. Across the hall, Montana removed his helmet and sat down. No fist pumps. No speeches. Just another night. That's how it always looked from the outside. But players knew better. Games like this didn't happen often. They happened when preparation met patience, when experience met urgency, and didn't flinch. Years later, highlights would show Marino's throws. They always did. But veterans talked about something else. They talked about that final minute, about how the loudest stadium they'd ever played in became silent, not because of shock, but because resistance felt pointless. They talked about how Montana never rushed, never forced, never panicked. He didn't beat Marino with a pass. He beat him with an ending. And that's why this game stayed alive long after the stats faded, because anyone could throw. But only one man decided when it was over. The league moved on. New
stars arrived, records fell, arguments continued, but whenever the conversation turned to greatness, not talent, not potential, but mastery, this game returned, not for the touchdowns, for the 45 seconds where nothing happened, and everything was decided. The scoreboard showed the final result, but the scoreboard wasn't what people remembered. They remembered the clock, because with 45 seconds left, the game had already ended. Not officially, not mathematically, but mentally. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It spread slowly like a chill moving through the stands. Fans checked the clock again, as if hoping it would tell a different story. It didn't. On the sideline, helmets stayed on, but shoulders slumped. The noise faded, not because people were upset, but because there was nothing left to demand. This wasn't a collapse. This wasn't a mistake. This was inevitability. On the opposite sideline, Montana's offense stood calmly. No urgency. No last-second instructions. Everyone already knew their role. Montana knelt once. The clock moved. A few defenders clapped, trying to inject energy into a moment that no longer needed it. Montana knelt again. The sound of the clock became louder than the crowd. Tick, tick. Somewhere in the stands, someone finally understood why this felt different. There had been no desperation throws, no risky fourth down calls, no moment where the defense failed. The game hadn't been taken. It had been closed. When the final whistle sounded, it felt almost unnecessary. The decision had already been made. Players met at midfield. Handshakes were exchanged. But even those felt subdued, like a formality after a verdict. Marino walked slowly toward the tunnel. His stat line would look good in the morning. It always did. He had thrown with precision, with confidence, with power. But none of it mattered now, because the most important play of the game wasn't a throw. It was time disappearing while he stood helpless on the sideline. That was the part that stayed with him. In interviews later, analysts would focus on strategy, clock management, field position, defensive fatigue. But players told a simpler story. They said that when Montana took the field for that final possession, the defense didn't believe they'd get the ball back. Not because they were weak, because they were realistic. In the locker room, Marino answered questions politely. He took responsibility where expected, deflected praise where necessary. But there was a pause when someone asked about the final drive. A brief silence. Just long enough to betray the truth. He had known. He had felt it. The moment Montana completed that first short pass, Marino understood something no highlight reel could show. This wasn't a quarterback duel anymore. This was a lesson. Across the hall, Montana sat quietly. No celebrations echoed from his side of the locker room. This wasn't joy. This was routine. Teammates spoke softly. Equipment clinked against the floor. Someone laughed, but quickly. Because nights like this demanded respect, Montana removed his wristband slowly. He didn't rush to the showers. He didn't linger for cameras. He simply existed in the aftermath. Because for him, this wasn't about proving anything. It was about reaffirming something everyone had started to forget. That football wasn't won by arms alone. It was won by endings. Years later, when players and coaches talked about that game, they rarely started with the score. They started with the silence. They talked about how the loudest stadium they had ever played in went quiet, not in shock, but in understanding. They talked about how panic never arrived, how there was no dramatic final play to remember, just a quarterback kneeling and a clock doing the rest. That's why this game aged differently. It didn't grow louder with time. It grew heavier, because every young quarterback who watched it learned the same lesson Marino learned that night. Talent can start a game, but control finishes it. And when people asked Montana years later about that night, he never mentioned Marino's arm. He mentioned the drive, the calm, the seconds, because legends aren't built in chaos. They're built when everything slows down, and one man decides exactly when the story ends.